a maid, a rich kid, and a burn from boiling coffee, on purpose. That night, Evelyn Marrow just wanted to finish her shift and go home to her sick younger brother waiting for her. Instead, she walked into Manhattan's most luxurious hotel room and walked out with a burn on her chest, tears unshed, and the city's most dangerous man staring straight into her eyes. Lucien Moretti doesn't save the weak. He has no reason to. But that night, he did, and everything fell apart from there. If you want to know what makes New York's coldest crime boss willing to burn down an entire city for an unknown girl, watch until the end. Like and comment the name of the city you're watching so I know how far my story has progressed. The Verona Grand didn't sleep. It just changed its face. By midnight, the marble lobby that swallowed tourists whole during daylight hours transformed into something colder, a cathedral of money and quiet cruelty where the staff moved like ghosts and the guests moved like gods. The chandeliers burned low. The concierge spoke in murmurs. Bellhops vanished into service corridors the moment they sensed a guest wanted privacy, which was always, which was every night, which was the unspoken contract everyone signed the moment they accepted a paycheck from a place like this. Evelyn Marrow had been signing that contract for 2 years. She pushed her housekeeping cart through the 43rd floor service corridor at 12:17 in the morning, white gloves already soiled from the previous suite, hair pulled back so tight against her skull it gave her a low-grade headache she'd stopped noticing sometime around month 3. The fluorescent lighting in the service hallway was the ugly kind. The kind nobody who paid $1,200 a night ever had to see. And it made the dark circles under her eyes look like bruises, which was appropriate because that's more or less what they were. Exhaustion wore itself into the body eventually. 2 years of midnight shifts had worn itself into hers. She was 24 years old and moved like someone older. The assignment sheet clipped to the cart said Suite 1904. Routine turn down. Fresh linens if needed. Replace champagne flutes. Check minibar. She'd been in 1904 before. It was one of the corner suites, big enough to park a city bus in, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown, and a balcony the guests almost never used because they were too busy with whatever it was men like that did in rooms like that after midnight. She didn't let herself think about what that was. Thinking too hard about the people whose sheets she changed was a slow way to lose your mind. She stopped outside 1904, pressed her ear briefly against the door out of habit, heard voices and laughter, knocked twice with the knuckle tap the hotel trained her to use, firm enough to be heard, deferential enough not to seem demanding, and waited. Nothing. She knocked again. Housekeeping. Laughter spiked from inside. Someone said something she couldn't make out, and then another voice answered, and there was the sharp sound of cards being slapped against a hard surface. Poker. She recognized it. Her father had played in games like that before he stopped showing up for anything. She used her key card. The smell hit her first. Bourbon and cigarette smoke and the particular territorial musk of men who believed rooms existed for their pleasure. 3 of them occupied the suite's main space like they'd conquered it, sprawled across furniture that cost more than Evelyn's monthly rent, jackets discarded, collars open, the ruins of an expensive meal scattered across the coffee table beside stacks of poker chips and a bottle of scotch that had been mostly murdered. She recognized one of them immediately and wished she hadn't. Vincent Hale, 28 years old. His photograph appeared in the Post-Society pages with enough regularity that even housekeeping staff learned the face. The jaw that looked engineered, the hair styled to suggest effortlessness while communicating enormous expense, the eyes that had never once registered an obstacle they couldn't buy away. His father was Crawford Hale, whose name appeared on 3 Manhattan towers and 2 senators. Vincent himself had been involved in 2 lawsuits that Evelyn knew about from break-room gossip, both settled quietly, both involving women who'd subsequently disappeared from public view. She moved toward the champagne area without making eye contact. This was the skill, existing in a space without becoming part of it. She'd gotten good at it. Most of the good ones did. Hey. She kept moving. Sometimes if you didn't acknowledge it, it went away. Hey, I'm talking to you. Vincent Hale snapped his fingers. Not once. 3 times. Like summoning a dog. Evelyn stopped, turned, kept her face neutral, which was its own kind of violence. The constant labor of manufacturing blankness over the thing you actually felt. Coffee, Vincent said. He hadn't looked up from his cards. Of course, Evelyn said. The words came out smooth and automatic, worn into her throat by repetition. How would you like it? Black, hot, now. One of the other men, older, heavier, with the complexion of someone who'd spent 20 years making other people's problems disappear, snorted at something on his phone. The third was younger, maybe Vincent's age, watching Evelyn with the passive, incurious appraisal of someone examining a piece of furniture they weren't sure they wanted to buy. Evelyn moved to the in-room coffee station and began preparing it. Her hands were steady. She'd trained them to be. The coffee machine was the expensive kind, a single-cup brewing system that cost more than her weekly pay, and it hissed and gurgled and produced a cup of perfect black coffee in approximately 90 seconds. She set it on a small tray, used a cloth to wipe the base of the cup, carried it to the poker table. Vincent glanced at her name tag when she set the cup down. He smiled. It wasn't a good smile. It was the smile of a man who'd just thought of something he found funny that nobody else would. Evelyn, he said, drawing the name out. Jesus, they let girls like you work in places like this now? The other men laughed. The heavy one didn't look up from his phone, but his shoulders shook. Evelyn lowered her eyes, said nothing. The art of the non-response. She'd practiced it until it was reflexive, until she could disappear inside it while her hands kept moving and her face kept its neutral mask, and the part of her that still had a spine quietly waited for the shift to end. She reached for the empty champagne flutes on the side table. That's when Vincent's elbow moved. She never knew, afterward, whether it was deliberate or whether she was telling herself it wasn't deliberate because the alternative was harder to carry. She suspected she would spend a long time not knowing. His elbow connected with the coffee cup. The coffee she'd just placed precisely, the coffee that was black and very hot. And the cup tipped and the contents detonated across her chest and throat in a wave of scalding liquid that moved faster than she could register it was happening. The pain was instant and total. It was not like being burned in a gradual way. It was like something switched on in every nerve ending along her collarbone and the left side of her neck simultaneously. A vicious, blistering heat that tore the breath out of her body so completely that the sound she made wasn't a scream. It was smaller than a scream. It was something compressed and involuntary that she was ashamed of the moment it left her. She stumbled backward. Her cart was behind her and she hit it and gripped the handle to keep from going down to her knees, which she would not do, which was the one thought that cut through the pain with any clarity. She would not go down on her knees in front of these men. The poker chips rattled when the table shook. The heavy man looked up from his phone. The younger one sat forward slightly. Vincent Hale looked at her, finally, fully, for the first time since she'd entered the room. And his expression was not embarrassment, and it was not concern, and it was not the manufactured apology of a man calculating the minimum required to make a problem go away. His expression was amusement, thin-lipped, private, satisfied. "Oops," he said. The room hung in a horrible silence for 1 second that felt geological. Evelyn's vision blurred at the edges. The burns on her collarbone and throat pulsed with a heat that was already blistering. She could feel the skin tightening, could feel the exact topography of the spill mapped onto her body in fire. Her left hand gripped the cart handle hard enough to whiten her knuckles through the glove. Her right hand pressed flat against her stomach, which was a thing she did when she was trying not to cry, a habit so old she'd forgotten where she'd learned it. The men were still laughing. The younger one had stopped, watching her with something that might have been discomfort if he'd had the character to follow it anywhere. The heavy one had resumed his phone. Vincent was picking up his cards. "You should probably get that looked at," Vincent said, not looking at her. "Burns get infected fast." She opened her mouth, closed it. The words that were available to her, the words she was permitted to say in a place like this, wearing a uniform like this, to a man like this, were few and inadequate, and she was still in enough pain that stringing them together required more than she had. Then a voice spoke from the shadows near the balcony door. She hadn't known anyone was there. The voice was low, not loud, calibrated in a way that made loud seem primitive, the kind of control that didn't need volume because it had already accounted for every outcome. You have 5 seconds to apologize. The laughter stopped as if a hand had covered a mouth. Vincent's head came up slowly. All three men turned toward the balcony. A man stepped out of the darkness near the curtained glass door. He'd been standing there long enough that Evelyn's mind immediately tried to calculate how much he'd seen and then realized the answer was everything, which meant he'd chosen not to intervene until the specific moment he chose to. And there was something in that calibration that was more frightening than if he'd reacted immediately. He wore a charcoal suit that fit the way expensive things fit, like it had been built for him specifically rather than adjusted after the fact. Black leather gloves. No tie. He was tall. Not the exaggerated height that makes men gangly, but the functional height of someone whose body had organized itself for purpose. Broad through the shoulders, dark hair with the first silver at the temples. A face that had been lived in hard, not ugly, not soft, a face that had been through weather and kept its structure. He looked maybe 40. He moved like someone who'd stopped being afraid of rooms around age 20. Evelyn didn't know who he was. Vincent Hale did. She could see it in the color change that moved through Vincent's face, the blood draining from the specific arterial confidence of someone who'd never been denied anything into something pale and recalibrated, and suddenly very aware of its own physical vulnerability. "Mr. Moretti," Vincent started. 4 seconds. The man, Moretti, didn't move toward Vincent yet. He stood near the balcony curtain with his hands loose at his sides and looked at Evelyn. Not at the coffee stain spreading across her uniform, not at the angry red skin visible at the edge of her collar, at her face, her eyes specifically, with a directness that had nothing possessive in it, which was confusing because directness from men in rooms like this was almost always possessive. He looked at her like he was taking inventory of something that mattered. Then he turned back to Vincent. "Apologize," he said. The word was quiet and absolute. Vincent's ego and his survival instinct ran the numbers visibly on his face. His ego had won every such calculation for 28 years. But something about the man standing near the balcony curtain must have communicated information that Vincent's ego couldn't overcome because his mouth opened. "She's just a maid," Vincent said. It came out quieter than he'd intended. Defensive. The voice of a man who knows he's already lost the argument and is making it anyway out of something he'd mistake for pride. What happened next took less than 2 seconds, and Evelyn's mind would replay it for weeks afterward, in slow, incremental, trying to understand its segments. Moretti moved. She'd seen fast before. She'd grown up in a neighborhood where fast sometimes meant the difference between going home and not going home. This wasn't that kind of fast. This was something quieter and more complete. A body that moved with the economy of someone who'd done violence so many times it had stopped requiring thought. He covered the space between himself and Vincent Hale in a way that seemed to violate the normal relationship between distance and time. And then Vincent's hand was on the marble poker table edge, and Moretti's gloved hand was on Vincent's wrist, and there was a sound, compact, structural, the sound of something bending that wasn't meant to bend. And Vincent screamed. The scream was enormous. It bounced off the ceiling and the windows and swallowed every other sound in the room. Vincent's knees buckled and his face went the color of old paper, and he kept screaming while Moretti held his hand pinned against the table edge with the same deliberate, impersonal pressure of someone holding a door open. The heavy man stood up. Moretti looked at him. The heavy man sat back down. 2 men had materialized near the suite's main entrance. Moretti's people, Evelyn realized, who had been stationed in the corridor or had entered through some other access. And they stood with the relaxed professional stillness of men whose job was to prevent exits rather than threaten anyone. Moretti looked back at Vincent. "You burned her," he said quietly. "Now you'll remember her." He released Vincent's hand the way you release something you finished with. Vincent crumpled against the poker table, holding his broken hand against his chest, tears and sweat mixing on his face, the arrogance fully evacuated and replaced with something rawer and less curated. Moretti turned to Evelyn. "Come with me," he said. Not a question, not a request. The syntax of a man accustomed to having his directions constitute reality. Every instinct Evelyn Marrow had developed over 24 years of learning when to trust men and when to run from them was firing at once, and they were firing in different directions, which was the problem. The rational part of her brain said, don't go anywhere with a man who just broke someone's hand in front of you. Another part of her brain, the part that was still processing the burns on her collarbone and the sound of Vincent Hale's laugh, said the man with the broken hand was the more immediate threat. She went. The private medical office was 3 floors below, accessed through a service elevator that required a key Moretti produced from his jacket pocket without hesitation, which told Evelyn that he had either arranged access to this space in advance or owned it outright, and neither option made her feel simpler about the situation she was in. The office was small and clean and looked like it belonged to a different building. Proper medical equipment, a reclining examination chair, overhead lighting that was functional rather than decorative. A doctor arrived within 4 minutes. She was a woman in her 50s with the efficient, unsurprised manner of someone who'd worked in unusual circumstances for a long time. She examined Evelyn's burns without excessive commentary, applied cooling gel and then a proper burn dressing to the collarbone and throat, and asked whether the pain was manageable twice. Evelyn said yes both times because she'd learned that manageable was a relative term, and she was good at it. Moretti stood near the room's single window the entire time, his back partially turned, looking at the narrow view of the city available from that angle. He'd lit a cigarette at some point. He smoked it the way he did everything else, without excess, without performance. When the doctor was done and had stepped out to give them some privacy that Evelyn hadn't asked for, the silence in the room stretched until it became its own kind of pressure. "You shouldn't have done that," Evelyn said finally. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Moretti didn't turn from the window. "He burned someone under my roof." "I'm nobody." She heard herself say it and hated it and said it anyway because it was the truth of the situation as she understood it. "I work here. Men like him do things like that. I've been doing this job for 2 years. It's not the first time." That made him turn. And for the first time since he'd stepped out of the shadows in Suite 1904, the composure fractured slightly at the edges. Not in any way that was obvious or theatrical, just a tightening around the eyes, a stillness that went 1 degree past stillness, a look that had something underneath it that the controlled surface wasn't entirely containing. "No," he said, "you're not nobody. You don't know me." "No." He looked at her for a moment with that same direct inventory-taking quality that had confused her upstairs. "You remind me of someone," he said. The words came out like he hadn't fully decided to say them before they were already out. "Someone I failed to protect." She waited for him to continue. He didn't. He turned back to the window. "You'll need to have those burns checked again in 48 hours, he said. "I'll arrange it." "That's not necessary." "It is." She studied his back, the rigid, controlled architecture of someone who'd built stillness into himself as a structural feature rather than a natural condition. Somewhere in the hotel above them, Vincent Hale was probably on the phone with his father. Somewhere in Queens, her brother Noah was asleep with the medical bills stacked on the kitchen counter beside the sink. And her shift wasn't even half over, and she was sitting in a private medical office 3 floors underground while one of the city's most dangerous men looked out a window and refused to explain himself. "Who was she?" Evelyn asked. Moretti was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "My sister," he said. The word landed in the room with the particular weight of something that had been carried a long time. "Her name was Sophia," he said. And then he didn't say anything else, and Evelyn understood, from the precise way he'd stopped, that Sophia was past tense in a way that didn't need elaboration. She sat with that for a moment. The burns on her collarbone throbbed under the dressing. She was going to have to explain this to her supervisor. She was going to have to fill out an incident report. She was going to have to navigate the complicated institutional calculus of a luxury hotel that employed her, and also depended on men like Vincent Hale spending money in their suites. And she had no way of knowing yet which of those things she represented more to the management of the Verona Grand. She was also, she realized, sitting alone in a room with Lucien Moretti, whose name she had just placed, had placed the moment she'd seen Vincent Hale's face change, because even housekeeping staff learned certain names if they worked in Manhattan long enough. Lucien Moretti, who reportedly controlled everything east of the BQE through a network of legitimate businesses and illegitimate arrangements that the city's law enforcement had been trying to dismantle for 15 years without success. Lucien Moretti, who attended charity galas and was photographed with mayors and whose name appeared in federal documents under terms like alleged and suspected and believed to be, none of which had ever produced a conviction. Lucien Moretti, who had just broken a man's hand for spilling coffee on a hotel maid. "I need to get back to my shift," Evelyn said. "No." She looked at him. "You're not going back upstairs tonight," he said. "I'll have your supervisor informed. Your pay won't be affected. You can't just—" "The burns need rest," he said. "Another few hours on your feet and the tissue under the dressing will swell. The doctor can explain it more specifically if you'd prefer." She opened her mouth, closed it. The frustrating thing was that he wasn't wrong. "I don't know what you want from me," she said. "Nothing." He said it without turning. "I want nothing from you." She didn't believe him. 2 years of working nights in a hotel full of powerful men had given her an extremely calibrated sense for when men wanted nothing from her, and it almost never corresponded to when they said it. But she sat in the chair with the burns throbbing and the tiredness pressing down on her from all directions, and she waited to see what nothing looked like. It looked for the next 2 hours like Moretti standing at the window and making occasional quiet phone calls in Italian, and an assistant bringing Evelyn tea without being asked, and nobody touching her or threatening her or demanding anything at all, which was the most disorienting thing that had happened to her all night. She was escorted home at 3 a.m. in a black car with tinted windows and a driver who didn't speak unless spoken to. The car was warm and the seat was leather, and the city moved past the windows in streaks of light, and Evelyn sat in the back and pressed her fingers very gently against the bandaging on her collarbone, and thought about a man named Lucien who had a dead sister named Sophia and eyes that looked at her like she was something he recognized from a long way away. She thought about it and then made herself stop thinking about it. She had medical bills to pay. She had a brother whose next surgery was in 6 weeks. She had a shift that started again at 11 the next morning. She did not have room for whatever that was. She got home at 3:45. Noah was asleep. She stood in the bathroom and carefully removed the dressing to look at the burns in the mirror, angrier than she'd expected, red, and already starting the specific kind of blistering that meant they were going to be uncomfortable for weeks. And then she recovered them and went to bed. She did not sleep. In her memory, the hotel suite kept replaying itself on a loop she couldn't turn off. The crack of Vincent's hand on the marble table edge, the sound of his scream, the way Moretti had looked at her in the moment before he said, "You remind me of someone." The way he'd said it, like he hadn't meant to and hadn't been able to stop himself. Her phone buzzed at 7 a.m. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Miss Marrow." A woman's voice, professional, unhurried. "Mr. Moretti would like you to know that your employment record has been amended to reflect last night as a paid medical absence. The follow-up appointment with Dr. Yuen is scheduled for day after tomorrow at 4 p.m. A car will come for you. If that time doesn't work, please let me know." Evelyn sat up in bed. "Who is this?" she asked. "My name is Clara. I work for Mr. Moretti. I didn't agree to any of this." "No," Clara said. There was something in her voice, not unkindness, but a particular quality of patience, like someone who'd explained complicated things to skeptical people before. "Mr. Moretti doesn't always wait for agreement on medical matters. He considers it a separate category." "Tell Mr. Moretti, Miss Marrow," Clara said quietly. "The burns on your neck are second degree. The dressing needs to be changed by a professional in 48 hours or you risk infection. I've been arranging things for Mr. Moretti for 11 years. I've never once been asked to arrange anything that harmed the person it was for." Evelyn sat in the silence of her small Queens apartment, while Noah's alarm went off in the next room, and the medical bills sat where they always sat, and the morning light came through the thin curtains and made everything look more manageable than it was. 4 p. I'll see, she said. "Fine." She hung up. She should have been more suspicious. She knew that. Every sensible instinct she had said that a woman in her position didn't get offers from men in Lucien Moretti's position and walk away from them clean. But the burns pulsed, and the bills were real, and her brother had a surgery coming, and she was so tired that sensible instincts sometimes had to wait in line behind the more immediate arithmetic of survival. What she didn't know, what she had absolutely no way of knowing, sitting in her Queens apartment at 7 in the morning with burned skin and a missed shift behind her, was that the previous night had not ended when she left the hotel. It had ended in a different sense in the lobby of the Verona Grand at approximately 4 in the morning when Lucien Moretti received a phone call from an attorney representing the Hale family. The attorney was polite in the specific way that legal threats are delivered when the person making them believes they have leverage. He mentioned Crawford Hale. He mentioned political relationships. He mentioned the documented injuries sustained by Vincent Hale and the potential legal exposure Mr. Moretti was facing. Moretti had listened to the entire call without interrupting. When the attorney finished, Moretti said 3 words, "Tell him no," and hung up. And that phone call and those 3 words was what started the timer that Evelyn Marrow didn't know was running. Because Crawford Hale was not a man who received no for an answer, and his son had a broken hand and a humiliation that had witnesses. And the fastest way to answer Lucien Moretti, Crawford Hale had decided by sunrise, was not through attorneys or politics or the careful pressure of establishment power. The fastest way was to find out what Lucien Moretti had decided to protect, and then take it. The follow-up appointment was at 4 p.m. on a Wednesday, and the car came at 3:40, which told Evelyn something about how Lucien Moretti's operation understood the relationship between time and authority. She was ready when it arrived. She'd told herself she wouldn't be, had told herself she'd make them wait, had told herself she'd call Clara back and cancel the whole arrangement. And then she'd spent 2 days watching the burns on her collarbone cycle through colors she didn't like, and she'd been ready at 3:35. The driver was the same one from the first night. He didn't introduce himself. He held the door open and she got in and he closed it, and they moved through Queens traffic without conversation, which suited her fine. She had too much to think about anyway. She'd called into the Verona Grand the previous morning, a real call, to her supervisor, not whatever amended record Clara had mentioned, and had been informed, with a careful neutrality that told her management had already received some kind of communication from somewhere, that her position was secure, that the incident had been documented, that she should rest as long as medically necessary. Her supervisor, Diane, had been working at the hotel for 19 years and knew when to say nothing beyond what was required. She said nothing beyond what was required. Evelyn had spent the rest of that day lying on her couch, while Noah ate cereal at the kitchen table and finished his homework and pretended not to notice that she was staring at the ceiling. Noah was 17. He was smart in the way that quiet people were smart. Observational, patient, the kind of intelligence that worked sideways around problems rather than through them. He'd been living with a congenital heart condition since birth, which meant he'd also been living with hospitals and procedures and the particular ongoing anxiety of a body that required maintenance since birth, and it had made him more serious than most 17-year-olds and more careful, and Evelyn thought far older than she wanted him to be. He didn't ask about the bandaging on her neck and collarbone until the second evening. "Work thing," she said. He looked at her for a moment with those patient, sideways eyes. "How bad is it?" "Second degree. It'll heal." How'd it happen? She'd thought about what to tell him, had constructed several versions of the truth ranging from partial to almost entirely false. In the end, she went with, "A guest was careless with coffee." Noah looked at the bandaging for another moment. Did anyone do anything about it? The question hung there. She thought about a man stepping out of shadows with gloved hands and that flat, cold voice. 4 seconds. "It was handled," she said. Noah nodded slowly in the way that meant he didn't believe the full version of what he was being told, but had calculated that pressing further wasn't going to produce anything more useful. He went back to his homework. Evelyn went back to the ceiling. Dr. Ewan's office turned out to be in a brownstone on the Upper East Side that had no signage and no visible connection to any medical building Evelyn had ever seen. The driver parked and escorted her to the door, which was answered immediately, which meant someone had been watching for the car. Inside it looked like a very well-appointed private practice, the kind that existed for people who needed medicine without paperwork. Doctor. Ewan removed the dressing, examined the burns with efficient hands, confirmed they were healing without infection, applied a new dressing, and prescribed a topical treatment she produced from a cabinet that was stocked with a level of specificity that suggested it had been stocked for Evelyn specifically. "These will scar minimally if you keep them out of the sun for the next 6 weeks," Dr. Ewan said. "The throat area is more vulnerable than the collarbone. Don't rush the healing." "I can't avoid sun," Evelyn said. "I have to work." "Wear the dressing. Change it every day. Come back in a week." "I can't keep coming here." Dr. Ewan looked at her over the rims of her glasses with the expression of a woman who'd had variations of this conversation before. "You can," she said. "The car will come for you." Evelyn was composing a response to that when Lucien Moretti walked through the inner door. He was in a different suit today, navy, similarly precise, and he was on a phone call he ended immediately when he saw her, which she noted and didn't know what to do with. He looked at the fresh dressing, then at her face. "Better?" he asked. "Improving," she said, which was not the same thing, and she saw from the slight shift in his expression that he registered the difference. Dr. Ewan excused herself with the smooth efficiency of someone who understood the room had changed. They were alone. Evelyn watched him move to the chair across from her examination table and sit down, and she noticed again the thing she'd noticed in the hotel. The controlled economy of how he occupied space, the absence of sprawl or performance. Men with power usually filled a room with it visibly. Moretti did the opposite. He compressed. "Crawford Hale called the hotel's parent company this morning," he said. She hadn't expected him to open with information. "About me?" she said. "About the incident. He's requesting your termination and threatening to pull the Hale Group's event contracts, which are worth approximately $2 million annually to the hotel." He said it without inflection, the way you'd read the weather forecast. "The hotel is going to decline." "How do you know that?" "Because I spoke to the hotel's ownership last night." She sat with that for a moment. "You can't keep arranging things," she said. "I can." "That's not—" She pressed her palm against her knee, which was what she did when she was trying to organize the right words before they came out wrong. "Mr. Moretti, I don't know what you think this situation is, but I'm not something that needs managing. I've been handling my own situation for a long time." "I know." "Then stop." He looked at her steadily. "Hale isn't finished," he said. "He humiliated his son in front of witnesses. He's going to want that addressed. The hotel is the easiest vector. So you'll protect my job by threatening the hotel ownership, by informing them of their options clearly. That's the same thing." "Sometimes." The bluntness of it startled a sound out of her that wasn't quite a laugh. He watched her without amusement but also without apology, which was a combination she wasn't used to from men in chairs across from her. "Why?" she said. "I need you to actually answer that. Not the thing about your sister, the specific reason why Crawford Hale's problem with you becomes your problem with Crawford Hale on behalf of someone you don't know." Something moved behind his eyes. "My sister's name was Sophia," he said. "She was 22. She worked a restaurant job while she was trying to leave a man who didn't want to be left. The man had connections. Not unlike the Hales, different industry. He had her fired from 3 jobs in 4 months. By the time I came back from abroad, she'd been isolated from everything she had. No income, no references, no way out that she could see." He stopped. His voice had stayed level throughout, which was somehow worse than if it hadn't. "I was building something in Milan. I didn't come back in time." Evelyn said nothing. "I've spent 12 years making sure no version of that happens in spaces I control," he said. "The Verona Grand is mine. Not on paper, but it's mine." "I'm not Sophia." "No, you're not." He looked at her directly. "Sophia was already broken by the time I understood what was happening. You're not broken? That's a different kind of reason." The room was very quiet. Outside somewhere a car horn moved through the sound of the city and faded. Evelyn pressed her fingers against the new dressing on her collarbone, not hard enough to hurt, just enough to feel it was there. "My brother has a surgery in 6 weeks," she said. "It's the 3rd one. We're current on the payment plan, but barely. If I lose this job, we lose the apartment within 2 months. I'm telling you this not because I want anything from you, but because I need you to understand that I don't have the margin to be someone's project." Moretti held her gaze. I understand margin, he said quietly. She believed him, which was irritating. Then we understand each other, she said. He nodded once. She left. She thought about that conversation for 3 days, not because she wanted to, because it kept surfacing regardless of what she pointed her attention at. During her return shifts at the hotel, during the commute, during the long, quiet hours when Noah was asleep and she was not. The specific texture of it, the way he'd said different kind of reason and then not expanded on it. The way he'd said, I understand margin, like those were words that had been earned rather than learned. She also thought, though she tried harder not to, about the thing Clara had said during the original call. 11 years. She'd worked for Moretti for 11 years. And in that time, Clara had said, she'd never arranged anything that harmed the person it was for, which was either true or the most sophisticated reassurance imaginable. And Evelyn was self-aware enough to know that she couldn't fully tell the difference. She did not expect to see him again. He appeared at the hotel on a Thursday night, not in a public area. She came out of a service corridor at 11:15, and he was standing in the 43rd floor hallway outside the service elevator, apparently waiting, as if the idea of waiting in hotel corridors was not a strange thing for a man like him to do. She stopped. What are you doing here? She asked. I have a suite on 38, he said. I wanted to ask how the burns are. You could have called Clara. I could. She looked at him for a moment in the fluorescent service hallway lighting, which was unforgiving to everyone and simply did not seem to concern him. They're healing, she said. Dr. Ewan said another week. He nodded. Your brother's surgery, he said. The payment plan you're on. What's the institution? Her jaw tightened. Don't, she said. I'm not offering charity. That's what people say before they offer charity. I'm asking a factual question about the specific financial mechanism because I know people in healthcare administration and there may be... Stop. The word came out flat and final. I know what you're doing. I understand why you're doing it, and I'm telling you no. Noah's situation is mine to manage, not yours. He looked at her. Okay, he said. She'd been ready for resistance. The okay landed without warning, and she had to readjust her stance around it. Okay, she said. The burns, he said. You're going back on shift? Yes. He nodded, looked at the cart, looked back at her. Be careful, he said. The Hale family has been making inquiries. She felt something cold move through her chest. What kind of inquiries? About you specifically, your address, your schedule. The cold settled lower. You should have led with that, she said. You would have accused me of manufacturing a reason to involve myself. She opened her mouth, closed it, because she would have. What kind of inquiries? She asked again, more carefully. Crawford Hale employs people whose function is investigation and pressure. They've been asking building management questions about your lease, employer documentation, your brother's school. Noah's school. The cold became something else, a tightening, focused, that moved from her chest into her hands. You're sure, she said. Yes. She stood in the service corridor and breathed very carefully and thought about her brother in school right now, 17 years old and careful and smart, who didn't know that his name had been run through a file somewhere by people employed by Crawford Hale. What does he want? She said. Specifically, to apply pressure to me through you, Moretti said. Making your life sufficiently difficult or unstable is a way of communicating that my actions have consequences. I'm leverage, she said. He didn't dress it up. Yes. Because you broke his son's hand over coffee. Because I refused to pretend what Vincent did was acceptable. She looked at him for a long time. And now my brother is on a list somewhere, she said. I'm working to contain it. You created it. The words came out harder than she intended and not harder than she felt. She watched them land on him. He didn't deflect. Yes, he said. So your protection is the reason I need protection. That's accurate. She turned away from him, pressed both hands flat against the surface of the housekeeping cart, and looked at the wall and breathed. The rage was real and specific, and it had nowhere to go that was useful, which was the worst kind. When she turned back, she kept her voice controlled. "I need you to guarantee me that Noah is not a target," she said. "Specifically, not vaguely. If Crawford Hale's people go anywhere near his school, I need to know that you will stop it before it becomes something I can't manage." "I already have someone at the school," Moretti said. The ground shifted slightly under her understanding of the situation. "Since when?" she said. "Since 2 days after the hotel incident." "You put someone at my brother's school without telling me." "Yes." She stared at him. "You should have told me," she said. "You would have refused." "That's not your decision to make." "It was the decision that kept him safer faster," Moretti said. The flatness of his voice wasn't cold. It was the flatness of someone who'd made a calculation and was willing to own it without dressing it as something else. "I made it. You're right that it wasn't mine to make. Both things are true." Evelyn stood in the corridor with the fluorescent lights doing their ugly work overhead, and she thought about all the calculations she'd been making for 6 years, since their mother got sick, since she'd started taking overnight shifts, since the first hospital bill arrived and she'd understood that her life had become a sequence of managed impossibilities. And she thought about a man who'd put someone at her brother's school without asking, because asking would have cost time. She hated that she understood the math. "If anything changes," she said, "anything, you call me first, not Clara, not some arranged car, you call me." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a card. Plain, black, a phone number, handwritten, no name. She took it. Their fingers didn't touch. She noticed that he was careful about that, and she noticed that she noticed it. "Shift," she said, and moved past him with her cart. He stepped aside without comment. She worked the rest of the shift in a state of compartmentalization, so deliberate it gave her a headache by 2 a.m. suite after suite. Towels, champagne, minibar inventory. The practiced invisibility. The physical autopilot that let the body work while the mind went somewhere else entirely. Except tonight, the somewhere else was not the restful blankness she'd trained herself toward, but a constant low-frequency processing of threat geometry. Crawford Hale. His people at her brother's school. Moretti's person also at the school. Her apartment under inquiry. Her employer at risk. Her brother's surgery in 6 weeks. And Lucien Moretti at the center of all of it, simultaneously the source of the problem and the only current structure standing between her and the worst versions of how the problem resolved. She took the subway home at 3:30 and stood in the rattling car and held the overhead bar and stared at the dark windows and thought, "This is what happens when you get seen. You spend years learning to be invisible, and then one man steps out of a shadow and looks at you like you're something that matters, and the whole invisible architecture collapses." She wasn't angry at him. She was too tired for anything that wasn't practical. She was angry at the situation. At Crawford Hale's particular brand of scorched earth retaliation against someone who'd already been burned. At the city's endless willingness to organize itself around the convenience of powerful men. At the fact that she'd been doing everything right, 2 jobs before this one, night school for 18 months before Noah's condition required she drop it, every bill paid on the day it was due or the day after. And it had still led her here to a fluorescent subway car at 3:30 in the morning calculating how to keep her 17-year-old brother safe from the consequences of a broken hand she'd had nothing to do with. She got home. Noah was awake. He was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open and his homework conspicuously not in front of him, which meant he'd been waiting up, which meant something had happened. "What?" she said immediately. He looked at her. His face was doing the careful, measuring thing it did when he was calibrating how much to say. "There was a man outside the school today," he said. "At pickup, just standing." Evelyn's chest tightened. "What did he look like?" she said, putting her bag down slowly, keeping her voice level. "30s, dark jacket. He wasn't doing anything, just standing at the corner and looking at the entrance." Noah paused. And there was another one across the street. 2, Crawford Hale's people and Moretti's. Both there, both visible enough that a careful 17-year-old had noticed. "Did anyone approach you?" she said. "No." "Did you talk to anyone?" "No." Noah looked at her steadily. "Evie, what's happening?" She sat down across from him. The kitchen table between them had 17 years of everything on it: homework and cereal bowls and medical forms, and the particular weight of two people who'd been each other's primary support structure for most of their remembered lives. She thought about what Moretti had said. I know what margin is. She thought about what she'd told him. Noah's situation is mine to manage. She looked at her brother's face, the precise, patient 17-year-old face of a kid who'd been managing a malfunctioning heart since birth and had never once complained about it in a way that was designed to make anyone else feel worse. It's connected to something at work, she said. A guest was involved in an incident. It's being handled. But for a few weeks, I need you to be aware of your surroundings. If anyone you don't know tries to talk to you, Evie, Noah, don't do the thing where you give me the kid version, he said. Not angry, just tired. I'm not 12. She looked at him. Then she told him most of it. Not Moretti's name, not the full scope of what Lucien Moretti represented, or the specific texture of Crawford Hale's capacity for damage, but the shape of it. The hotel incident, the retaliation, the reason men were standing outside his school. Noah listened without interrupting, which was characteristic. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The man who helped you at the hotel, he said. He's dangerous. Yes. And the people watching the school, also dangerous. One group is his, one group is the other side. So I'm between them. For now. Noah looked at his hands on the table. She'd always watched his hands, kept one eye on them always, had since he was small, because the color of his hands and fingers was one of the tells when his oxygen levels were dropping. Tonight, they were fine, pink and warm and 17. Okay, he said. Okay? What do you need me to do? She looked at her brother and felt something move through her that was too complicated to name. Don't walk home alone, she said. Text me when you get to school. Text me when you leave. Done. And don't, she stopped. If the man with the dark jacket talks to you, if anyone connected to the hotel incident approaches you, you call me. Before you respond to anything, you call me first. Okay, Noah said. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his for a moment. A brief, matter-of-fact gesture, there and then gone. And then he closed his laptop and said he was going to sleep. She sat at the kitchen table after he'd gone. She took out the plain black card Moretti had given her, held it under the kitchen light. The number was written in precise, small handwriting, not a printed card. Someone had written it by hand. She thought about calling it. Then she put the card on the table and went to bed. She did not call. Not that night. The call came to her instead at 6:47 the next morning. Unknown number. She answered before the second ring. Miss Marrow, Clara's voice, but different from usual. The professional smooth had a quality underneath it tonight that Evelyn's body registered before her brain caught up. Mr. Moretti needs you to go somewhere safe immediately. Can you wake your brother? She was already sitting up. What happened? Crawford Hale's people were seen in your building overnight. The lobby camera caught them at 3 a.m. They left, but a pause that contained more than pauses usually contained. Mr. Moretti believes the visit was reconnaissance. Evelyn was out of bed, moving. Clara, she said, what does reconnaissance mean in this context? Another pause. It means they were identifying exit points, Clara said, and your schedule. Evelyn stood in her dark hallway outside Noah's door with the phone against her ear and the city coming alive outside the window and the medical bills on the kitchen counter and 6 years of carefully managed survival stacked behind her. And she understood with a clarity that was almost physical that the life she had built on invisible labor and managed exhaustion and careful, practiced smallness had just become something she could no longer navigate alone. She knocked on Noah's door. Get dressed, she said through the wood. We need to go. Now? His voice thick with sleep. Right now, she said. Pack what matters. We have 20 minutes. She heard him move. She went back to the kitchen table and picked up the plain black card. And this time she dialed. It rang once. I know, Moretti said. No greeting, no preamble, like he'd been holding the phone waiting for it. Clara called me, Evelyn said. Her voice was steady in the way that things are steady right before they're not. 3 a.m. My building. I have people outside your door right now. Don't open it until I tell you. I'm packing Noah. Good, 15 minutes. There'll be a car. Where are we going? A pause. Not hesitation. Calculation. Somewhere Crawford Hale doesn't own, he said. She hung up and went back to Noah's room. 20 minutes later, they were in a black SUV moving through pre-dawn Queens with 2 bags between them and the medical bills still on the kitchen counter because she hadn't thought to grab them until they were already on the street, and she wasn't going back. Noah sat beside her with his backpack on his lap and his hands loose and his face doing the careful measuring thing. He didn't ask questions. She told him enough the night before that questions weren't necessary yet. The car took them north through the city and then out of it entirely, through the kind of dark that required distance from Manhattan to achieve, and eventually through a gate in a stone wall that opened without the driver touching anything, and down a long driveway lined with trees that were enormous and old and indifferent. The estate sat at the end of it like a fact. 3 stories. Stone exterior the color of old pewter. Every window lit from within. Moretti's people were visible at intervals around the perimeter. Not dramatically, not in the way movies staged security, but present in the specific way that meant they'd been there long before anyone arrived and would remain long after. Evelyn got out of the car and looked at it and thought, this is what the other side of invisible looks like. Clara met them at the door. She was exactly what her voice had suggested. 50s, efficient, with the kind of face that had decided long ago not to waste expression on anything that didn't require it. She showed Noah to a room on the 2nd floor and showed Evelyn to one adjacent to it and told them both that there was food in the kitchen and that Mr. Moretti would be there within the hour. Noah stood in the doorway of his room and looked at Evelyn. Nice place, he said carefully. Don't get comfortable, she said. He almost smiled. She didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed in the room Clara had given her. Clean, simply furnished, a window that looked out over dark grounds. And she turned her phone over in her hands and thought about all the mechanisms of her life that were currently outside her control. The apartment. The shift she'd missed tonight. The payment plan on Noah's surgery that required consistent employment to stay current. Moretti arrived at 5:43 a.m. She heard the car and was downstairs before Clara could come for her. He came through the front door in the same controlled way he did everything. Coat, gloves. The look of a man who'd been awake for a long time and had organized himself around it rather than against it. Behind him came 2 of his people carrying between them what appeared to be a laptop case and a document bag, which they took directly to a room off the main hallway without being directed. Moretti stopped when he saw Evelyn at the bottom of the stairs. He looked at her the way he sometimes did. That inventory quality, checking something. You're both here, he said. Obviously. Noah? Asleep, finally. What happened at my building? He moved toward the room his people had entered. She followed without being invited because she was done waiting to be invited to information about her own situation. The room was a study of some kind. Bookshelves, a long table, a screen currently displaying a grid of security feeds she recognized as the exterior of her apartment building in Queens. Moretti's people set up the laptop and moved to the edges of the room. Crawford Hale contracted a firm, Moretti said, standing in front of the security feeds. Not his regular legal team, a private security company that operates in the gray area between investigation and intimidation. They've been documenting your schedule, your building access points, Noah's school route. He touched the screen, expanding one of the feeds. Last night, 2 of their people entered your building using a duplicated key fob for the lobby. The image was grainy but clear enough. 2 men in the lobby at 3:14 a.m., moving with purpose toward the elevators. They went to my floor, Evelyn said. They stood outside your door for approximately 4 minutes and then left. 4 minutes. Taking photographs of entry points, lock type, sight lines from the stairwell. She looked at the timestamp, 3:14. She'd been asleep 3 hours earlier, and Noah had been asleep, and 2 men had been standing outside her door in the dark, taking photographs of how to get in. What do they want? She said. Not angry yet. Still in the phase before angry where the information was still organizing itself. Leverage over me, Moretti said. The most effective version of that is taking something I've demonstrated I value. You've demonstrated it by making me visible, she said. Before the hotel, before you, I was a night shift hotel maid in Queens. Crawford Hale didn't know I existed. No. So your protection made me a target? Yes. No deflection, no mitigation. She turned away from the security feeds and pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and breathed carefully. The anger was there now, and it was real, and it had specific coordinates. Not just Hale, not just Moretti, but the whole structural fact of it, the way powerful men's conflicts became weather that other people had to survive, the way she had been minding her own life, managing her own impossibilities, and still ended up here. I need you to fix it, she said. Her voice came out very flat. I don't care how. I need Crawford Hale to stop. I need Noah out of whatever geometry he's currently in, and I need my life back. Moretti looked at her. I'm working on it, he said. Work faster. Something moved through his expression, not offense, something that might have been, in a different architecture, admiration. There's something you should know, he said. The shift in his voice made her turn back. He was looking at the table rather than at her. A document had been opened from the bag his people brought. He pushed it across the table toward her. She picked it up. It took her a moment to understand what she was reading. The letterhead was from a law firm she didn't recognize. The document was dense with legal language. And then her eye caught a name in the second paragraph, and her brain stopped processing language for approximately 3 seconds. Diane Pellegrino, her supervisor at the Verona Grand. She read it again, made sure she was reading it correctly. The document was a signed statement, dated 4 days ago. In it, Diane Pellegrino, 19 years at the hotel, careful, efficient, the woman who'd told Evelyn with careful neutrality that her position was secure, described in specific, formal language a pattern of behavioral issues on the part of Evelyn Marrow, including complaints from guests, performance deficiencies, and an incident involving the deliberate disruption of a private function in Suite 1904. Deliberate disruption. She told them it was my fault, Evelyn said. The words came out strange and flat, like they belonged to a different sentence than the one she was having. Crawford Hale's legal team approached her 3 days ago, Moretti said. We don't know what they offered or threatened. The statement was filed with the hotel's parent company this morning as supporting documentation for a formal complaint against your employment. Diane has been my supervisor for 2 years. I know. She told me my position was secure. She told you that before they got to her. Evelyn set the document back on the table with the precise, controlled movement of someone who is keeping their hands occupied so that the rest of them has something to follow. She thought about Diane, the 19 years, the efficient manner, the way she'd always treated Evelyn with the specific fairness of a woman who understood what it cost to work nights and had worked them herself once. She thought about whatever they'd put in front of Diane that had been sufficient to produce a signed legal statement describing Evelyn Marrow as a disruptive employee. She thought about what she would have signed to keep her brother safe. The anger shifted, didn't disappear, but it changed shape, moved around Diane, and settled somewhere larger and colder. The hotel, she said. My job. The complaint is formal. The parent company will be required to respond. Moretti paused. I've already been in contact with their legal team. It will not result in termination. You can't guarantee that. I can. Stop saying that, she said. Stop telling me you can guarantee things. You couldn't guarantee that 2 men wouldn't be outside my door at 3 a.m. You couldn't guarantee that my supervisor of 2 years wouldn't sign a legal statement calling me a liability. What exactly can you guarantee, Mr. Moretti? He held her gaze. That I will not stop, he said. The simplicity of it cut under her anger in a way that more elaborate assurances wouldn't have. She sat down in the chair across from where he was standing and put her hands flat on the table and looked at the security feed still running on the screen and thought, Who else? She said finally. What? Who else have they gotten to? You brought me this document because you thought I should know. What are you not showing me because you think I shouldn't? The pause was short, but it was there. Evelyn, don't. The use of her first name in that careful register was almost a tell. It signaled the kind of softening that preceded information someone didn't want to deliver. Don't manage me, show me. He reached into the document bag and produced a second folder. She opened it. The photograph on top was Noah's school, taken from across the street, from a height that suggested a vehicle. Time-stamped 2 days ago, 11:52 a.m. In the photograph, Noah was visible at the building entrance during what was clearly a lunch break. His jacket, his backpack, the specific way he stood with his weight slightly to one side that she'd have known in any photograph. He was talking to someone, a man she didn't recognize, standing close. Noah's posture was not alarmed. He was listening, or appearing to listen, with the polite, attentive manner he'd developed for situations where he wasn't sure what was happening yet. "When was this?" she said. Her voice had gone somewhere very quiet. "2 days ago. He didn't tell me. He may not have found it significant. Who is that man?" We identified him as an employee of the firm Hale contracted. His name is Garrett Solis. He's been with the firm for 6 years. His function is primarily information gathering through social contact. Social contact. A stranger talking to her 17-year-old brother with a malfunctioning heart outside his school 2 days ago. And Noah had come home that night and sat at the kitchen table and not mentioned it. She stood up. "I need to talk to Noah," she said. "Evelyn?" She was already moving. She took the stairs. Clara appeared at the top of them, startled, and stepped aside. Evelyn knocked on Noah's door twice and didn't wait. He was awake. Sitting on the edge of the bed in the same clothes he'd left the apartment in, apparently having not really slept, his laptop open on the mattress beside him. He looked at her face when she came in. "What?" he said. She sat down across from him on the room's single chair and put the photograph on the bed between them face up. Noah looked at it. He was quiet for long enough that she could hear the house settling around them. "He said he was a student journalist," Noah said, "from Columbia, working on a piece about healthcare accessibility and young adults with chronic conditions. He asked if I'd be willing to talk." A pause. "He seemed legitimate. What did you tell him?" "I said I wasn't interested." Noah's eyes came up to hers. "Evie, I walked away. I didn't tell him anything." "Did he ask you anything before you walked away?" Another pause. "He asked my name. I said it. He asked what grade I was in. I said 11th. He asked if my sister worked nearby." Noah's jaw tightened. "I said I had to get back inside." So he'd confirmed her name, her connection to Noah. Noah's grade, which corresponded to his age, which was the kind of specific detail that made a 17-year-old with a documented medical condition more precisely targetable. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. "Because I walked away. Because I didn't think—" He stopped, pressed his hands together. "Because you already looked like you were carrying enough." The thing that moved through her chest at that was too large and too complicated for the moment, so she set it aside. "From now on," she said, "everything, even if it seems like nothing." "Okay. I mean it, Noah. I know you mean it." He looked at the photograph. "How bad is this?" She considered lying, looked at his face, the careful, patient 17-year-old face that had been managing its own fear since before it had language for fear, and decided against it. "Bad enough that we're in this house," she said. "For now, that's the shape of it." He nodded. She went back downstairs. Moretti was where she'd left him, standing at the table with the document bag, on the phone again in Italian. He ended the call when she came back into the room. "He didn't give them anything useful," she said. "I know. We've been monitoring the firm's communications." She stopped. "You've been monitoring them?" "Yes." "Since when?" "Since the morning after the hotel incident, when it became clear the Hales intended to pursue the matter." She stood in the doorway of the study and looked at him and thought about all the days of the past 2 weeks during which Moretti's apparatus had been monitoring Crawford Hale's hired firm's communications. And she had been changing dressings and taking the subway and telling Noah it was being handled, and neither of those things was wrong exactly, but together they described a gap between what she'd understood to be happening and what had actually been happening that made her feel, briefly, like the floor under her understanding of events was less solid than she'd believed. "What else are you monitoring?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "Several things," he said. "Including me?" "No." She held his gaze for a long moment. looking for the specific quality in a person's face when they're managing a lie versus when they're telling the truth. She'd gotten good at it over the years. You had to, when you were working nights in hotels full of people who had reasons to misrepresent themselves. She believed him. She didn't entirely understand why. "Tell me how this ends," she said. "The real version, not the reassurance version." He was quiet for a moment. "Crawford Hale needs something to show for this," Moretti said. "He can't absorb a public situation involving his son without a response. His entire operational identity is built on the understanding that costs are imposed on anyone who acts against Hale interests. So he needs to win something. He needs to be seen winning something. There's a difference. And if you don't give him something, then he escalates until the collateral cost of the conflict outweighs his interest in winning it. What does escalate look like?" Moretti's expression shifted in the particular way it did when he was deciding how much of the actual answer to provide. "It looks like what's already happening," he said, "except faster and with less caution." She absorbed that. "You could give him me," she said. "That's the obvious play. I leave the hotel. I disappear from whatever this is. You withdraw. He wins by default." "No. It would end it." "No," Moretti said again. The flatness of it was complete and final, the same way a structural wall is flat and final. Not because of what was built into it, but because of what it was built to hold. She looked at him. "Why not?" she said. Not a challenge. A genuine question. He didn't answer immediately. He moved to the window. The same way he'd moved to the window in Dr. Yuen's office, in the hotel suite, the characteristic positioning of a man who did his thinking with his back to a room. "Because Sophia walked away," he said. "Because the man she was leaving had someone in every place she tried to land, and she walked away from each one, and eventually there was nowhere left." He stopped. The muscles in his back and shoulders were visible through the suit jacket in a way they usually weren't, a compression that came from the inside. Walking away from Hale doesn't end it. He reads it as confirmation that the tactic works. Then he uses it again. On the next person. Evelyn stood very still. "So this was never only about me," she said. He turned from the window. "No," he said, "it never is." She thought about that. She thought about the hotel and the service corridors and the 2 years of invisible labor and the art of the non-response and all the ways she'd learned to become small enough to move through spaces without snagging on the people who occupied them. She thought about Noah's school photo and Diane's signed statement and 2 men in a lobby at 3 in the morning. She thought about a dead girl named Sophia who'd walked away from every place she tried to land. Something shifted in her understanding of the situation. Not dramatically, not with the clarity of revelation, more like a lens correcting its focal length. The same image, brought into a slightly different sharpness. "What do you need from me?" she said. He looked at her carefully. "Nothing you're not willing to give," he said. "That's not an answer." "It is, actually." She sat back down in the chair across from the table and looked at the security feeds and the document folders and the grid of her apartment building's exterior, and she thought about what it would mean to stop trying to reduce her exposure and instead understand herself as someone inside the conflict rather than adjacent to it. It was not a comfortable thought. It was, she was beginning to understand, the accurate one. "I want to know everything," she said. "Not the curated version, not what you think I can handle. Everything Crawford Hale has done in the past 2 weeks that relates to me, to Noah, and to this situation. All of it." Moretti studied her for a moment. Then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down and opened the document bag and began. It took 2 hours. By the end of it, Evelyn understood the shape of what she was inside with the kind of unambiguous clarity that she suspected Moretti had been trying to protect her from. Crawford Hale's firm had documented her schedule with a precision that meant they'd been watching for longer than anyone had initially believed. Not 2 weeks, but closer to 3, starting from the night of the hotel incident itself. They had her employment records, obtained through a contact at the hotel's HR department, whose name appeared in the files as a paid source. They had a medical profile on Noah built from his school's administrative records, which were not supposed to be accessible to outside parties, and which had been accessed anyway through a data broker the firm used regularly. They also had something else. something that Moretti had saved for last and placed in front of her without preamble, and which she'd looked at for a long time before understanding what she was seeing. It was a financial document, complex, dense with numbers. It took her several minutes of reading before she understood it was a record of the payment plan on Noah's surgery, not the hospital's version. A separate document showing the same account numbers, the same payment history, the same outstanding balance, but with annotations in a different hand, calculations, timelines. "They're going to call the debt," she said. "The firm has identified a technicality in the payment plan contract, a clause about employment status that would allow the hospital's finance department to reclassify the account if your employment situation changes." Moretti's voice was very even. "If the formal complaint against you at the hotel results in termination, the whole balance comes due at once, within 30 days of a status change." She sat with that. The number was not small. She knew the number. She'd memorized the number the day the payment plan was signed, and she'd carried it with her every day since the way you carry something heavy that you've learned to balance. If it came due at once, if it came due in 30 days with no employment and no savings buffer that could absorb it. Noah's neck surgery was in 6 weeks. "They're not trying to hurt me," she said slowly. "They're trying to make me impossible to protect. They're trying to create a situation where you can't solve the problem by throwing money and legal resources at it because the problem moves faster than the solutions." Moretti looked at her. "Yes," he said. "This has been the plan from the beginning. Since approximately the 4th day." She looked at the financial document. She looked at the security feeds. She looked at Lucien Moretti sitting across from her in the gray pre-morning light of a study in a house surrounded by armed men, and she thought about what she'd said to him in the service corridor of the Verona Grand. "Noah's situation is mine to manage." She understood now that that had been true when she said it and was no longer true. "I need you to make a call," she said. "To who?" "The hospital's finance department, today. Whatever you need to do to make that payment plan irrevocable regardless of my employment status." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking you to pay it. I'm asking you to make it impossible for Crawford Hale to weaponize it. There's a difference." He nodded once. "Done," he said. "And I need you to tell me what the next move is. Not the legal move. Not the containment move. The move that ends this." Moretti was quiet for a long moment. "That's a different conversation," he said. "I know. Have it with me anyway." He looked at her for what felt like a long time. Outside the window, the sky was beginning its grudging concession to morning. Not light yet, but a reduction in the density of dark. "Crawford Hale's position is built on the belief that Lucien Moretti will not expose himself to legal risk over a hotel maid," Moretti said. "He believes I'll absorb cost up to a threshold and then retreat. Will you?" "No." "Then what does not retreating look like?" He stood, moved to the window. The familiar position, thinking posture, she understood it now. "It looks like taking the thing Crawford Hale cannot afford to lose," he said. "What's that?" "The same thing everyone in his position can't afford to lose." He turned from the window. His face in the growing gray light was very still. The illusion that his actions have no consequences he didn't choose. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. He looked at it. Something changed in his face. Not dramatically. A compression. A shuddering of something that had been briefly open. "What?" she said. He looked up from the phone. "They took Noah," he said. The words reached her like something physical. A concussive displacement of air that moved through her chest and took the breath with it. She was out of the chair before she understood she'd stood. "He's not upstairs," Moretti said. His voice had gone somewhere she hadn't heard it go before. The control was still there, but underneath it was something stripped, and the word underneath was raw. Evelyn was already moving through the door before Moretti finished the sentence. The hallway, the stairs, Noah's room, door open, bed empty, laptop still warm on the mattress, the indentation of his weight still visible in the covers. Her hand pressed flat against the sheet, and it was warm, and that warmth was the most terrifying thing she'd ever felt, because warmth meant recent, and recent meant minutes, and minutes meant... "How?" she said. The word came out without volume. Moretti was behind her. His people were already in motion, two of them sweeping the second floor, one on a radio, another moving fast toward the back of the house. Clara appeared at the top of the stairs with a face that had gone the color of old concrete. "The east window," one of Moretti's men said from down the hall. "Ground floor utility room. Glass is broken from the outside." From the outside. They hadn't come through the front. They hadn't come through anything guarded. They'd come through a utility room window on the ground floor east side, which meant they'd mapped the estate, which meant they'd had someone watching the estate, which meant this had been planned before Evelyn and Noah ever arrived. "They knew we were coming here," she said. Moretti's jaw was tight. "Yes." "How long have they had someone on this location?" He didn't answer immediately, which was its own answer. "How long?" she said again, and her voice had something in it now that was past fear, a flatness on the other side of fear that she didn't have a name for. "We're determining that," one of his men said. "That's not an answer." She turned to Moretti directly. "You brought us here. You said this was somewhere Crawford Hale didn't own. How long have they had eyes on this property?" "The perimeter sweep was clean at 3 a.m., Moretti said. "They came in after." "Noah has a heart condition." The words came out very precise, very separated. "If they don't know that and they know," Moretti said. She stared at him. "The medical profile," he said. "From the data broker. They know his condition." Which meant they'd taken a 17-year-old with a documented cardiac condition through a broken window in the dark. Which meant either they were careful enough to manage that or they weren't, and Noah was already... She stopped that thought at its root. Physically stopped it, pressed it back, because the alternative to stopping it was a direction she could not afford to go right now. "His phone," she said. "Does he have it?" "Check yours," Moretti said. She already had it out. No messages. She pulled up Noah's contact and typed, "Where are you?" Sent it, watched the screen. The delivered indicator appeared. Then nothing. She called. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail, and his voice on the voicemail message was the voice of a kid who'd recorded it 6 months ago when his phone was new and he'd been in a good mood and she'd told him the message was too long and he'd said he'd change it and never had. She lowered the phone. "Find him," she said to Moretti. It wasn't a request. Moretti was already on his own phone, speaking in rapid Italian, moving back toward the stairs. His people converged in the hallway below with the organized efficiency of a system activating rather than a group of men making decisions. She followed him down. In the study, the screens had multiplied. 2 of his people were working laptops, while a third managed a phone relay, and the security feeds now showed not just the estate perimeter, but a spreading grid of street-level cameras, some official, some clearly not. Moretti stood at the center of it and directed without raising his voice, and the room responded like a system that had been built specifically for this. Evelyn stood at the edge of it and understood that she was not a functional part of this machine, and that the most useful thing she could do was stay out of its way, and that understanding was one of the hardest things she'd ever done. 7 minutes. It took 7 minutes before one of his people said, "Got a vehicle. Black transit van, plates cloned from a registered commercial vehicle. East on Route 25, 20 minutes ago." "Direction," Moretti said. "Staying east, toward the waterfront." "The waterfront." Moretti turned to look at her. "Brooklyn," he said. "Hale has a facility on the docks. Industrial space, been in his portfolio for 12 years, technically a storage operation." "Take me," she said. "No." "Moretti, you're not trained for..." "He's my brother." The words came out like something breaking. "You don't get to leave me here." He looked at her. His face was doing the thing it sometimes did, the compression, the controlled processing, and then something in it shifted. "You stay in the vehicle," he said. "Whatever happens inside, you stay in the vehicle until I tell you otherwise." "Fine." "I need you to say you understand what fine means in this context." "It means I stay in the vehicle until you tell me otherwise, and I don't do anything that gets someone killed." He held her gaze for 1 more second. "Get your coat," he said. They moved in 3 vehicles, the black SUV with Evelyn and Moretti and 2 of his people, and 2 more cars behind with the rest of the team. No sirens, No speed that would attract attention on the pre-dawn highway. Moretti sat beside her in the back seat and made calls and received calls and spoke in the clipped, efficient shorthand of a man operating a complex system in real time. And Evelyn sat beside him and kept her hands flat on her thighs and breathed. In, out, in, out. Noah, who'd told her he'd said nothing to the man outside the school, who'd come home that night and sat at the kitchen table and said, "Okay, I know, I will," who'd covered her hand briefly on the table and gone to bed, who was 17 and had been through enough procedures that he understood the specific fear of medical crisis in a way most adults didn't. If his stress levels spike, she said. Moretti looked at her. His heart, she said. If they frighten him enough, if his adrenaline, I know, Moretti said. Do your people know? The ones going in? I've told them. Tell them again. He picked up his phone and said 4 words in Italian. The car moved through the dark. 32 minutes from the estate to the waterfront, and every minute had a texture she would remember later. The way the highway lights strobed through the tinted windows. The sound of Moretti's people communicating through earpieces in a frequency she couldn't follow. The particular quality of her own heartbeat, which was too fast and too aware of itself. They stopped 2 blocks from the water. The facility was visible from where they parked, a long, low industrial building behind a chain-link fence. The kind of structure that existed in the specific gap between functional and abandoned, not maintained enough to suggest active operation, not derelict enough to attract code enforcement. 3 loading dock doors facing the water, light in 2 windows at ground level, a guard visible at the fence line, trying to look like he wasn't. How many inside? Moretti said quietly. 6 confirmed, one of his people said through the earpiece feed. Possibly 8, 2 vehicles in the south lot. Noah? Thermal shows 1 smaller signature in the northeast interior, seated, stationary. Seated, stationary. She released a breath she'd been holding for 30 minutes. He's sitting, she said. He's sitting, Moretti confirmed. Is he? The thermal doesn't give us more than that, but stationary is good. She pressed her back against the seat and looked at the facility through the window and thought, okay. He's sitting. He's inside. He's 17 years old and sitting in that building, and in approximately the next 30 minutes, either this gets better or it gets catastrophically worse. Vincent Hale is inside, one of Moretti's people said. She felt Moretti shift beside her. Confirmed? He said. Vehicle matches his registered plate. Modified front panel from the hand injury. Automatic controls. He's in there. Vincent Hale. Not Crawford. The son. The broken hand in its metal brace. The man who'd smiled over spilled coffee and said, oops. The man who'd looked at her burns with amusement. In that building right now, with her brother. What does he want? She said. Not asking, thinking aloud. A video, Moretti said. His voice had gone somewhere very cold. Something Crawford can use, something that shows the tactic worked. He wants you to come for Noah. Yes. And when you do, he films it. Crawford gets footage of Lucien Moretti breaking down the door of a private commercial facility, which goes to law enforcement or press or both. That's the play. She thought about it. Then don't break down the door, she said. Moretti looked at her. Send me, she said. The silence in the car was specific and immediate. No, Moretti said. Listen to me. Vincent Hale has Noah because he wants to demonstrate that you can be maneuvered, that his family can apply pressure to the right point and produce a reaction. If you go in there with your people and you take Noah back by force, you give him exactly what he came for. Footage, a narrative, Lucien Moretti rampaging through private property. What you're suggesting is that I walk up to that door and knock on it. She held his gaze. I'm not a threat. I'm not armed. I'm a hotel maid from Queens. If I go in there and ask for my brother, what is he going to film? A sister asking for her brother back. That's not a weapon against you. It's not a weapon against me, Moretti said carefully. It's a target on you. He won't hurt me. You don't know that. He wants leverage. I'm more useful to him undamaged. She watched his face. He's not going to hurt me in front of cameras he's already running. while there are witnesses in that building, with his father's legal strategy depending on the optics of this whole situation. Moretti was very still. "I'll have an earpiece," she said. "Your people will hear everything. The moment he says anything that changes the equation, you come in. But give me the chance to walk out with Noah without turning this into something that follows you for the next 3 years in federal court." He looked at her for a long time. She held it. "He broke Vincent's hand," one of his people said quietly, not to anyone in particular. "Hale's gonna want to." "I know what Hale wants," Evelyn said. "I also know that Vincent Hale, with his father's lawyers watching every move, is not going to add assault charges to his existing exposure in front of his own cameras." Moretti reached into his jacket and produced an earpiece so small she almost didn't see it. He held it out to her. "You go in," he said. "You ask for your brother. You don't negotiate. You don't threaten. You don't give him anything he can use. If he puts a hand on you, you'll know immediately. If he says anything that suggests Noah's condition has been compromised, I'll say the word weather, and you come in." He looked at the earpiece in his hand, then at her. "This is not what I would choose," he said. "I know," she said. "Do it anyway." He placed the earpiece himself, careful, precise, not touching more of her than the task required. She felt it settle into the curve of her ear. "We're on," a voice said through it immediately. Clear, present. She opened the car door. The waterfront air hit her, cold, salt-edged, carrying the smell of diesel and something organic from the water. Her feet on the asphalt were loud to her own ears. She walked toward the facility fence, and every step was an act of deliberate construction. Posture, pace, the conscious suppression of the thing that wanted to run. The guard at the fence line saw her coming and straightened. She stopped at the gate. "My name is Evelyn Marrow," she said. "I'm here for my brother. Tell Vincent Hale I'm alone." The guard looked at her, spoke into a radio, waited. 30 seconds. The gate buzzed open. Inside, the facility smelled like industrial cold and old machinery, and something chemical underneath. Fluorescent strips lit the interior in sections, leaving deep pockets of shadow between loading equipment and stacked pallets of something she didn't look at closely. The floor was concrete with dark stains she also didn't look at closely. 2 men flanked her immediately after the door, not touching. Flanking. She kept walking. Noah was in a cleared space near the northeast wall. Seated. She'd known that from the thermal, but seeing it made something in her chest release and immediately retighten. He was in a metal chair. His hands were zip-tied in front of him. His jacket was still on, which meant they'd been careful enough about the cold. His face when he saw her crossed through about 4 expressions in 2 seconds. Relief, guilt, fear on her behalf, and then the deliberate flattening of all of it into the careful, measuring look he'd been developing since he was 12 years old. He was okay. He was okay right now, in this moment. She held on to that. "Stop there," Vincent Hale's voice from across the space. She stopped. He emerged from the shadows near the loading docks. The broken hand was in a metal brace that extended partway up his forearm, and he moved with the slightly altered gait of someone managing pain they hadn't anticipated still being this present. His face was different from the hotel, the tailored confidence stripped back to something rawer, angrier, the anger of someone who'd had to revise their understanding of their own invulnerability. 2 cameras on tripods were visible, one angled at the space between Evelyn and Noah, one angled toward the main entrance. She registered them and didn't look at them directly. "Where's Moretti?" Vincent said. "Not here," she said. "He sent you alone." "I came alone. There's a difference." Vincent looked at her for a moment with the evaluating look of someone trying to determine if the piece on the board in front of them was worth what it appeared to be. "You walked through that gate by yourself," he said. "For him. For my brother. Because he told you to. Because my brother is 17 and has a heart condition and has been tied to a metal chair for an hour," she said. "And because I'm his sister, and that's what sisters do. This isn't complicated." Vincent moved closer. Not all the way to her. Stopped at a distance that was still comfortable for him, which told her he was cautious. Good. Caution was better than recklessness. "Where is he?" Vincent said again. "Right now. Where's Moretti?" "I don't know," she said. You came here without knowing where he is. I came here to get my brother. And if I don't give him back, she looked at him evenly. Then you don't give him back, she said. And you explain to your father's legal team why you're holding a minor with a documented medical condition in an industrial facility in Brooklyn, and that becomes the narrative instead of whatever you came here to film. Something moved through Vincent's face. My father's attorneys are managing a situation that was already complicated before tonight, she said. You holding a sick kid makes it significantly more complicated. You know that, I know that. Let's stop doing the thing where we pretend we're not both doing the math. You're not in a position to. Neither are you. She held his gaze. Your hand is broken. Your father is 3 lawsuits deep in the political fallout from a hotel incident that has witnesses. You've now added kidnapping to the calculation. She paused. What exactly did you think was going to happen tonight, Vincent? The name. First name. She watched him react to it. A small thing, but it shifted the architecture of the exchange slightly, pulled it off the ground he'd been standing on. I thought Moretti would come through that door, Vincent said. That's what I thought. And instead you got me. Instead, I got you. He looked at her with something that was not quite contempt and not quite curiosity. The maid. The maid, she agreed. He sent you in here because he knew I'd film him coming in. He's using you. She considered that for a moment. Maybe, she said, or I made the decision myself. Or both things can be true. She kept her eyes on him. Let Noah go. Whatever point you came here to make, you made it. You found us. You got inside. You took him. Crawford Hale's firm has documented all of it. That's the point made. Now let him go. Vincent looked at Noah. Noah looked back at him with 17-year-old eyes that had seen the inside of too many medical facilities to be easily frightened by much else. Your sister's sleeping with a criminal, Vincent said to him. She's not sleeping with anyone, Noah said. His voice was steady. And you zip-tied my hands, which is going to make your lawyer's week pretty interesting. A beat of absolute silence. Then Vincent laughed. A real laugh, brief, involuntary, the laugh of someone who'd been surprised out of a script. It was the most dangerous moment. Not because laughter was dangerous, but because the interruption of the script created space that could go anywhere. Evelyn took a step forward. I'm going to untie him, she said. Statement of fact, not a request. She walked to Noah's chair. The 2 flanking men moved. She felt it in the peripheral shift of their bodies, and then didn't move further. She crouched in front of Noah's hands and worked the zip tie, which was tight enough that it took several seconds. And in those seconds, the room was very quiet, and she was aware of the cameras and Vincent Hale's breathing and the cold concrete under her knees. The zip tie came loose. Noah pulled his hands apart slowly, flexed his fingers, looked at his wrists. Okay, she said quietly. Yeah, he said. She stood, turned back to Vincent. We're leaving, she said. Vincent hadn't moved. He was watching her with an expression that had shifted against it, something colder working its way up through the surprise. You think it's that simple, he said. I think you let me walk in here and untie my brother, she said, which means some part of you already made this decision. Or I'm letting you think you made it. Vincent. She said his name again, same way. What do you want? Specifically, right now. What outcome do you want from this room? He looked at her, and she saw it. Saw the thing underneath the anger, underneath the cameras and the broken hand and the enormous inherited apparatus of Crawford Hale's institutional retribution. She saw a man who'd expected Lucien Moretti to burst through that door and had instead gotten a woman who knelt on a concrete floor and untied her brother's hands and asked him what he actually wanted. I want him to bleed for it, Vincent said. The words came out raw, not polished. Real. He broke my hand, in front of people, like I was nothing. I know, she said. Like I was nothing, he said again. I know what that feels like, she said, and she meant it. I know exactly what that feels like. Something moved through his face. This doesn't end it, he said. It doesn't end anything, she agreed. But it ends tonight. Noah stood up from the chair. She felt him beside her, felt the warmth of him, the particular physical fact of him being upright and mobile and present. Vincent looked at her, then at Noah, then at the cameras. Then something in his jaw shifted and he looked away, toward the loading dock doors and the black water beyond them, and he made a sound that was not quite a word and not quite anything else. "Get out," he said. She put her hand on Noah's arm and walked. The two flanking men stepped back. She counted steps, 10, 15, 20, and the exit door was ahead, and she pushed through it, and the cold waterfront air hit them both, and Noah made one sound next to her that was not a word, just air leaving his body, and she gripped his arm harder. They were 30 feet from the door when she heard it, not through the earpiece, physically, through the air, from inside the facility. A single gunshot. She spun. The door behind them stayed closed. "Down," said Moretti's voice through the earpiece. "Get down now, both of you." And then his people were moving from 3 directions at once, the vehicles converging with headlights cutting through the dock darkness. And someone was shouting inside the building, and the door came open hard. And one of Vincent's men came through it running and went down before he cleared the threshold because Moretti's people were already there. Moretti himself came past her moving fast, coat, gloves, that controlled terrible economy of motion, and he caught her arm as he passed. "Are you hit?" "No." "Noah?" "I'm fine," Noah said, from somewhere to her left, and his voice was steady, and she would think about that steadiness for a very long time. Moretti held her arm for 1 second with a grip that was too tight and then released it and went through the door. The next 4 minutes were the kind that don't organize themselves into sequence until much later. She had Noah by the arm, and one of Moretti's people was directing them toward the vehicles, and there was shouting from inside, and then a second, shorter burst of sound that wasn't a gunshot, and then silence. Then Moretti's voice through the earpiece, flat and controlled. "It's clear." She looked at the facility door. "What happened?" she said. A pause. "Vincent Hale fired at one of my people," the voice through the earpiece said. It was not Moretti. It was the coordinator, somewhere in one of the vehicles. "The shot missed," Mr. Moretti's team responded. "Is Vincent alive?" the coordinator said. "Injured." She closed her eyes briefly. Noah was beside her, his shoulder against hers, both of them standing in the cold waterfront air, while the sounds of Moretti's people finishing whatever needed finishing came muffled through the facility walls. "Hey," Noah said quietly. She opened her eyes. "Your hands are shaking," he said. She looked down at them. They were. She hadn't noticed. She pressed them flat against her thighs, to the same gesture, always the same gesture, the body finding its own mechanisms, and breathed. The facility door opened. Moretti came through it. He was walking, which was the first thing she checked. Then she saw the dark spread across the left side of his shirt, below the ribs. And her body understood what she was seeing before her mind completed the thought, and she was already moving toward him when he raised one hand slightly. Not to stop her, not a barrier, just a registration of her approach. "It's not," he started. "Don't," she said. "Don't tell me it's not serious." She got to him and put her hand against his side where the dark spread was, and felt the heat of it through his shirt and the pressure of him, the solid physical fact of him still standing. He looked down at her hand against his side. Then he looked at her face. "The car," he said. "We need to move before—" "How bad?" she said. "Through and through, nothing critical." He held her gaze. "I've been shot before." "That's not reassuring." "I know." His people were converging. Noah appeared at her left shoulder. Inside the facility, she could hear the specific sounds of a situation being managed, phones, directions, the efficient aftermath of violence. Moretti's hand came up and covered hers where it pressed against his side. Not removing it, just covering it. "We need to move," he said again. His voice was very quiet. She looked at him, at the face she'd been reading for 2 weeks, learning its compression and its control and the specific way it fractured at the edges around certain things, and she understood that the night wasn't over, that there were police sirens starting somewhere in the middle distance, that Vincent Hale was injured inside a building with 2 cameras running and a story to tell, and that whatever had been true about this situation an hour ago had changed irrevocably. "Okay," she said. She did not remove her hand. He did not remove his. "Evie," Noah said from her left, with the specific tone of someone who has registered a police siren getting. The siren was close enough to feel in the chest. Evelyn pulled her hand away from Moretti's side and grabbed Noah's arm, and they moved. Not running, because running was a signal, and signals brought attention, but fast. The controlled fast of people who understood that the next 60 seconds had a specific geometry that needed to be navigated precisely. Moretti's people had already begun the dissolution that trained teams performed after situations like this. Vehicles repositioning, the facility door being secured from inside by whoever was staying behind to manage the aftermath. Communications being routed through channels that would not produce records in any registry that mattered. She'd watched enough of Moretti's operation over the past 2 weeks to recognize the choreography, even if she didn't know all the steps. She and Noah got into the second vehicle. Moretti got into the first. She watched through the tinted window as he lowered himself into the back seat with the careful, controlled movement of a man managing pain he was not going to acknowledge out loud. And then the door closed, and she couldn't see him anymore. 2 police cruisers passed them going the other direction on the waterfront road. Neither slowed. Noah sat beside her in the dark of the SUV and said nothing for several miles. His wrists had red marks where the zip tie had been. He kept his hands in his lap and looked at them occasionally, not in distress, in the assessing way he had, checking data. "He got shot," Noah said finally. "Yes. For us." She looked at her brother. "It's complicated," she said. "Is it?" She turned back to the window. The city was beginning its first gray concessions to morning. A delivery truck. A bodega with its lights on. The specific texture of New York at 5 a.m., which was its own thing. Not night anymore and not day yet. A suspended state that felt like the city was briefly between versions of itself. "He said it wasn't serious," she said. "People say that," Noah said. "Doesn't make it true." She knew that. She'd heard doctors say it in specific registers that meant it was true, and other registers that meant they were buying time before something more complicated needed to be said. She didn't know which register Moretti had been using on the waterfront in the dark, with his hand over hers and the sound of sirens starting somewhere behind them. They went back to the estate. The medical setup there was more extensive than she'd realized. A room off the ground floor that Clara took her to without preamble, where Dr. Yuen was already present, which meant she'd been called before they left the waterfront, which meant Moretti's people had flagged his injury before he'd acknowledged it to anyone. He was sitting in a chair when she came in, shirt off. Dr. Yuen working at his left side with the focused efficiency of someone who'd done this before. The wound was below the ribs on the left. She'd been right about the location from the heat of it, through his shirt. And it looked worse under fluorescent light than she'd let herself imagine during the drive. "Through and through," he'd said. "Nothing critical." Dr. Yuen's face said, "This requires more than a field dressing." Moretti looked up when Evelyn came through the door. "Noah," he said immediately. "He's fine. Clara has him." She stopped a few feet from the chair, looked at the wound, looked at his face. "You should be at a hospital." "No hospitals." "That's not—" "No hospitals," he said again, not loud, the same way he said everything, as a fact that had already been settled somewhere prior to the conversation. "Dr. Yuen has the equipment here." She looked at Dr. Yuen, who looked back at her with the expression of someone who had made this argument already and lost it. "The fragment nicked the intercostal muscle," Dr. Yuen said. "It's not life-threatening if we manage it correctly. I'd prefer a surgical suite." "You have what you need here," Moretti said. "Lucien, you have what you need here," he said again. Dr. Yuen pressed her lips together and went back to work. Evelyn pulled a chair from the wall and sat down across from him and stayed. Not because he asked her to, he didn't ask her to, but because the alternative was waiting somewhere else in the house with the not knowing, and she'd established some time in the past 3 hours that she was done waiting in other rooms for information about things she was inside of. He looked at her across the space between them while Dr. Yuen worked. "Vincent fired first," she said. "Yes." "Will his people say that?" "Some of them will say whatever Crawford Hale pays them to say." He kept her gaze steady, even though Dr. Yuen was doing something at his side that should have been making steadiness difficult. "What they say doesn't change what happened." What happened is going to require a version, she said, for law enforcement, for whoever was monitoring those cameras in the facility. I know. Vincent has cameras. He came there to film something. What he filmed is a woman untying her brother, Moretti said, and then a confrontation between his own man and my security team, initiated by his own man. The cameras were running before and after. The sequence is what it is. She thought about that. He didn't expect me to walk in, she said. No. He expected you. Yes. So the footage he got is not the footage he came for. Moretti looked at her with something in his expression that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same territory. No, he said. It's not. Dr. Yuen said something short and sharp, and Moretti went still, and Evelyn watched his face during whatever the next 2 minutes required of him. The complete architectural stillness of a man who had organized himself entirely around not displaying pain, which she understood was not bravery exactly, but a kind of discipline so practiced it had become structural, like the invisible labor of working nights and keeping your face neutral while a rich man laughed at your burns. Different circumstances. Same fundamental act of compression. When Dr. Yuen stepped back to prepare the next phase, Moretti exhaled once, controlled, deliberate, and his eyes came back to Evelyn. You shouldn't have gone in there, he said. It worked. It worked, she said again. I'm not going to pretend it was reckless just to make you feel better about the part where you let me do it. He looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. You're not the type. What type am I? He considered that with the seriousness he gave most things. The type that does the math and accepts the answer, he said, even when the answer is hard. She sat with that. Outside the window, the gray was becoming something that might eventually be light. She could hear the estate settling into its morning sounds. Clara somewhere in the kitchen, Moretti's people cycling through their rotations, a bird somewhere in the enormous old trees lining the driveway. What happens now, she said, to Crawford Hale? His son discharged a firearm at a private security operative in a facility with running cameras and 8 witnesses, Moretti said. That's a criminal exposure his father's attorneys can't fully contain. They can reduce it. They can negotiate the trajectory, but they cannot make it disappear. He paused while Dr. Yuen did something that required his full concentration for a moment. Crawford Hale is going to spend the next 18 months managing his son's legal situation. He's not going to spend those months managing me. That's not the same as it being over. No, he agreed. It's not the same. But it's a sufficient change in the geometry. She understood geometry now in ways she hadn't 3 weeks ago. And you, she said. He looked at her. The gunshot wound, she said. The facility. Whatever your people did in there after we left. My people were responding to a threat, he said. Defensively. And the rest of it, the past 3 weeks. Crawford Hale's attorneys are going to build a file. They've been building a file on me for 11 years. Something in his voice that wasn't quite wry and wasn't quite tired, something that had accepted a particular truth about itself a long time ago and made peace with carrying it. Files are not the same as cases. But they accumulate, she said. He looked at her directly. Yes, he said, they accumulate. She understood what he was telling her without the shape of the sentence that would have said it plainly. The accumulation was the thing. The compound weight of all the decisions made over all the years, the empire built in the specific way his had been built, the files in the specific number they'd been filed. It didn't resolve. It compounded. And one day the compound weight of it would reach a threshold that even Lucien Moretti's resources and legal architecture couldn't offset. He knew that. She could see that he knew it. He'd known it for a long time. Dr. Yuen finished the primary work and gave instructions in the efficient, non-negotiable tone she apparently used for everything, and left them to a dressing that would need changing and a specific list of things that would determine whether a hospital became necessary after all. Moretti listened to all of it with the attentiveness he gave information that was operationally relevant. When she left, the room was very quiet. Evelyn stood up and moved to the window. The light outside was real now, thin and white and early, the kind that made everything look slightly provisional, like the world was still deciding whether to commit to the day. I need to go back, she said, to the apartment. To my life. She turned from the window. Noah has school in 4 days. I have shifts. The payment plan? Whatever you did with the hospital's finance department, I need to know what that looks like on my end. Clara can walk you through it. I want to understand it myself. I know, he said. I'll have the documents prepared. She looked at him in the chair. The bare torso, the fresh dressing, the gray morning face of a man who'd been awake for most of a night that had required a great deal of him. He looked, she thought, different than he had in the hotel suite 3 weeks ago. Or she was seeing him differently. It was hard to know which. Diane, she said, my supervisor. Something shifted in his expression. What about her? Whatever she signed, whatever they offered or threatened, I don't want it held against her. She held his gaze. She's been at that hotel for 19 years. She was protecting herself. I understand that. He looked at her for a moment. She signed a document that could have cost you your employment, he said, while Crawford Hale's firm had 2 men photographing the entry points to your apartment. I know what she did. I'm telling you I understand why. She didn't blink. People do things under pressure that they wouldn't do otherwise. You know that better than anyone. A long pause. Yes, he said. So leave Diane alone. Okay, he said. She believed him. That was the thing she kept returning to, the specific confounding fact of it. She believed him when he said okay, the same way she'd believed him when he said no hospitals and through and different kind of reason. She'd spent 2 years perfecting the art of reading the people who moved through the Verona Grand suites, cataloging the gap between what they said and what they meant. And Moretti's gap was smaller than most. Not because he was transparent, he wasn't, he was deeply not. But because when he committed to a thing, he committed to it entirely, and that entirety was visible if you knew what you were looking at. She'd been learning what she was looking at. Noah's surgery, she said. 6 weeks. The account is secured. I had it restructured through a separate instrument that's not contingent on your employment status. It's not charity. It's a formal amendment to the payment plan that the hospital's finance department has already signed. You'll receive the documentation today. How much did that cost you? Nothing that mattered. That's not Evelyn. Her name in that register, the careful one. It cost me a phone call and a conversation with someone who owed me a professional courtesy. The numbers didn't change. The structure did. That's all. She stood at the window with the morning light behind her and looked at him. I don't know how to do this, she said. Do what? Whatever this is. She gestured, not dramatically, just a small movement of her hand that indicated the room, the estate, the 3 weeks, the whole accumulated weight of it. I've been managing alone for 6 years. I know how to do that. I know the math of it. I don't know the math of this. He was quiet for a moment. There isn't one, he said. Not yet. That's not helpful. No, he agreed. It's not. She turned back to the window. A bird moved through the old trees, fast, specific, gone before she could identify it. Your sister, she said. Sophia. She felt rather than saw him go still. You carry her like a debt, she said. Everything you do, the protection, the apparatus, the whole structure of it. You're paying something back. A long silence. Yes, he said. That's not... She stopped, started again. You can't pay it back. That's not how that works. You know that. I know that. But you keep trying. Yes. She turned from the window. She would have been 22, Evelyn said. If she'd lived. She'd be 34 now, 12 years. She would have built something in 12 years, found her way out of whatever she was in. She was trying to get out. That's what you said. She was trying. His face was doing the controlled thing, but underneath the control something was present that usually wasn't. I know, he said. Then let it be enough that she was trying, Evelyn said. Not that you didn't make it back in time, not the debt. Let it be that she was someone who tried. The room was very quiet. She hadn't planned to say any of that. It had come from the same place the decision to walk through the facility door had come from. The place that bypassed the careful, managed calculus and went directly to the thing that was true. Moretti looked at her for a long time. His face had changed, not dramatically. Nothing about him was dramatic. But the compression had shifted, released something fractionally, the way old structures release tension after long-maintained pressure is removed. He looked, briefly, less like a man who had organized himself around a debt, and more like a man who was considering what it would mean to put it down. "Thank you," he said. It came out very quiet. Not the practiced quiet of his usual control. The different kind. She nodded once, then she moved to the door. "I'll have the car ready when you want it," he said behind her. She stopped with her hand on the doorframe. "The card," she said. "The one you gave me. The number." "Yes. I'm keeping it." She felt rather than heard the shift in the room. "Okay," he said. She left. The next 3 weeks moved differently than the 3 before them, not easily. Nothing about Evelyn Marrow's life operated on easy, but with a different quality of difficulty. The weight was still there, but it had redistributed itself into something she recognized the shape of, which made it possible to carry without constant recalibration. She went back to the Verona Grand. Diane was at the front desk of the housekeeping department when Evelyn came in for her first shift back. The older woman looked at her when she came through the door, and something moved through her face. Not guilt exactly, because guilt had already been through there and done its work, but something on the other side of guilt. The specific, tired look of a woman who'd made a decision under pressure and had been living with it since. Evelyn took her cart from the rack. "Marrow," Diane said. She stopped. "I'm sorry," Diane said. 2 words. Flat. Not decorated. Evelyn looked at her supervisor of 2 years, the 19 years of hotel service in her posture. The look of someone who'd been doing the math of survival for a very long time and had sometimes come up with answers she wasn't proud of. "I know," Evelyn said. She pushed her cart toward the service elevator. Behind her, Diane said nothing else. There was nothing else to say. Some things between people were resolved by the act of acknowledgement, and some things required time, and some things required both. And Evelyn had enough experience with the complicated arithmetic of human failure to know that this one was going to need all 3. She was willing to let it take the time it needed. She had learned recently that some things couldn't be forced into resolution faster than they were ready to go. Noah's surgery was on a Tuesday in early December. She sat in the waiting room for 4 hours and 20 minutes. She brought a book and didn't read it. She drank 3 cups of bad coffee from the machine in the corner and watched the door that the surgeon would come through when there was something to say. At hour 3, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. But she knew the handwriting the number had been written in, and she answered. "How is he?" Moretti said. "Still in." She paused. "How did you know today was the day?" Clara had the date. Of course she did. A brief silence, the kind that had content in it. "He'll be fine," Moretti said. "You don't know that." "No," he said. "But the surgeon has done this specific procedure 43 times with a favorable outcome rate that Clara's research suggests is well above the standard benchmark, so the probability is strong." She sat in the waiting room chair with the bad coffee and the unread book and felt something move through her that was equal parts exasperation and something she didn't have a clean name for. "Clara researched my brother's surgeon," she said. "She researches everything." "That's—" She stopped. "Thank you." "Call me when he's out," he said. "Okay." She called him at hour 4 and 20 minutes when the surgeon came through the door with the specific walk of someone who has good news and is carrying it carefully because they understand what it means to the person waiting. Noah's surgery was complete. The repair had gone as planned. He was in recovery and would be for several hours, and she could see him in approximately 90 minutes. Moretti picked up on the second ring. "He's out," she said. "It went as planned." A pause on his end. "Good," he said. 1 word. But she'd gotten good at reading what was underneath his words. "Yes," she said. She went to see Noah at 6 o'clock. He was still coming out of the anesthesia, half present, the particular unfocused quality of someone whose body had been through a significant thing and was slowly reoccupying itself. He looked young in the hospital bed, younger than 17. She sat beside him and held his hand and watched his face until his eyes cleared enough to find hers. "Hey," he said. His voice was rough. "Hey, did it work?" Surgeon said it went perfectly. He closed his eyes briefly, opened them. "The man," he said. "Moretti. What about him? Is he—" Noah's brow shifted, the effort of formulating something while still half sedated. "Is he someone you trust?" She looked at her brother's hand in hers, the pink warmth of his fingers. The red marks from the zip tie were long gone, healed without leaving anything visible. "I'm working on it," she said. Noah looked at her with the careful, sideways intelligence that hadn't been touched by the anesthesia. "That's a yes," he said. "Go back to sleep," she said. He almost smiled, closed his eyes. She sat beside him in the hospital room while the monitors made their steady sounds and the winter dark pressed against the window and the city moved on outside in its indifferent, continuous way. And she sat with the particular quiet of a woman who had been through a storm of someone else's making and had come out on the other side of it, changed in ways she was still discovering. She thought about Sophia, 22 years old and trying to get out of something and running out of places to land. 34 now if the world had been different. Building something, probably. The type that builds things. Evelyn recognized the type because she was the type. She thought about Diane's 2-word apology and the 19 years behind it. She thought about Vincent Hale's face when she'd said his name in the facility, the way the script had fallen off him for one unguarded second when she'd crouched on the concrete and untied her brother's hands. She thought about Crawford Hale, who was currently navigating the specific legal consequences of a son who'd fired a gun at the wrong moment in a building with cameras, and whose firm's contract with the investigative company had been terminated 4 days after the waterfront incident, and whose political associates were quietly creating distance. Not justice. She was too old and too experienced for that particular word, but consequence. A sufficient and specific rearrangement of who bore the weight of what. She thought about Lucien Moretti in a chair with a fresh dressing and a 12-year-old debt, and the specific way he'd said thank you when she'd told him to let it be enough that Sophia had been someone who tried. She took her phone out and looked at the plain black card she'd photographed and stored. She didn't call. Not tonight. Tonight was Noah's night. The 4 hours and 20 minutes in the waiting room and the one-word good and the hand in hers and the almost smile. Tonight didn't need anything added to it. But she kept the photograph on her phone. In the folder she looked at deliberately, not the one she had to search for. The weeks after that had a different rhythm. Noah recovered with the particular efficiency of a young body that had been through this before and knew the route. He went back to school on the Thursday of the second week and texted her from the entrance. A single period, which was the code they'd established for, "I'm here and I'm fine and you don't need to worry," delivered with the characteristic economy of a 17-year-old who understood that some communications were about the recipient more than the sender. She texted back a single period. He made honor roll that semester. She found out when the letter arrived. A physical letter, which the school still sent printed on heavy paper with the school seal in the corner. She stood in the hallway of their Queens apartment and read it 3 times and then sat down on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet under the sink, which was not an elegant response to good news, but was the honest one, and she pressed the letter against her chest and breathed. She photographed it and sent it without caption to the number on the plain black card. The response came in 4 minutes. A single line. He earned it. Not you should be proud or congratulations or any of the available formulations. He earned it. The specific credit going to the specific person who'd done the work, which was the right thing, and she hadn't expected anything less and was still moved by it anyway. She started calling on Sundays. Not every Sunday, not on any established schedule, but Sunday mornings when Noah was at weekend robotics club and the apartment was quiet, and the city outside the window was doing its Sunday thing. Slower, more provisional, the particular light of a day that didn't have the week's architecture around it. She would sometimes make the call. They talked about things that had nothing to do with Crawford Hale or the estate or the facility on the waterfront. He told her in one call that he'd been to Milan twice in the years before Sophia died, that there was a particular street in the Navigli district that he'd been unable to go back to since. She told him about her mother, not the end of it, not the hard part, but before, When she'd been teaching Evelyn to make her grandmother's recipe on a stove that only 2 of the 4 burners worked on, and how the dish still tasted different when all 4 burners worked. He listened to things the way he did everything, completely, without interruption, with the quality of attention that made what you were saying feel like it had weight. She did not ask him to change what he was. She understood by now that was not a conversation available to them, not because she didn't have the words for it, but because the architecture of what he'd built and the choices that had built it were not things that reversed in the space of Sunday phone calls. They were what they were. He was what he was. She was choosing, slowly and with full awareness of what she was choosing, to put those things in the part of the equation she didn't have control over and pay attention to the part she did. He came to the hotel once more, in January. Not a suite. The lobby bar, for coffee, which was the kind of ordinary thing that was complicated for a man with his particular presence in any room. She came downstairs in her civilian clothes, off shift, on her way home, and he stood up when she came through the door, which was a small thing and which she noticed. They sat across from each other, with coffee between them and the lobby's controlled noise around them, and she thought about the first night. The service corridor, the fluorescent lights, the cart she'd gripped with whitened knuckles while the burns tore through her chest. She thought about the distance between that night and this one, which was not long in calendar terms and was very long in everything else. "You look different," she said. He considered that. "The injury healed," he said. "That's not what I mean." He looked at her. She looked back. "I've been thinking about the Navigli district," he said. "The street I told you about." "What about it?" "I think I might go back." He said it the way he said things he hadn't fully decided yet. Not tentative, but with the quality of something being tried on while he described it. "I've been avoiding it for 12 years. "What changed?" she said. He looked at her with the direct inventory quality she'd learned to read, the one that had confused her in the hotel suite and clarified over subsequent weeks into something she understood was not possession and not appraisal, but a specific kind of recognition. The way you look at something that has altered your understanding of a thing you thought you already knew. "Someone told me," he said carefully, "that it was enough that she was someone who tried." Evelyn held her coffee cup. Outside the lobby windows, January moved through Manhattan in its cold, indifferent way. People and vehicles and the perpetual motion of a city that did not slow down for anything. The Verona Grand's marble lobby hummed with its controlled, expensive quiet. She thought about 6 years of managed impossibilities. 2 jobs, then this one. Night shifts and medical forms and the particular loneliness of being someone else's gravity. The hotel suites and the invisible labor and the art of becoming small enough to move through spaces without snagging on the people in them. She thought about a night 3 months ago when a man had stepped out of shadows and looked at her. Not at the burns, not at the uniform, at her eyes. And something ancient and stubborn inside her had refused to look away. "Milan in spring is supposed to be good," she said. He looked at her. "I've heard that," he said. "I've never been anywhere in Europe," she said. "I've never been anywhere, actually. Noah's talking about college applications. He won't need the same kind of managing in another year." She said it to her coffee cup. Not to him, but in a room with him, which was its own kind of statement. The silence between them had the quality it sometimes had now. Not empty, not pressured, but inhabited. The silence of 2 people who have been through the particular crucible of a shared emergency and come out on the other side with the specific knowledge of each other that only that kind of fire produces. She looked up from her coffee cup. He was watching her with that face she'd spent 3 months learning. "It's complicated," she said. "Yes," he said. "I'm not, She stopped. "I'm not someone who makes decisions like this without understanding what I'm deciding." "I know. And I don't entirely understand yet." "I know that too," he said. She looked at him across the coffee and the lobby noise and the 3 months and the whole complicated weight of everything they'd been through and were still in the middle of, and she thought, this is what it looks like to not have the math yet. This is the part before the equation resolves. She had spent 6 years being good at equations. She was, she discovered, not entirely opposed to sitting in the unresolved space of this one for a while. "Sunday," she said. "Sunday," he said. She finished her coffee, put on her coat. He stood again when she stood, which was still a small thing and which she still noticed. She walked through the lobby and through the door and out into the January cold of Midtown Manhattan, and the city received her the way it always had, without acknowledgement, without ceremony, as just another person moving through it. And she pulled her coat tighter and walked toward the subway and felt, underneath everything, the particular quiet of a woman who has been through a storm and found herself on the other side of it, still standing and tentatively, not entirely alone. The city kept moving around her. She kept moving through it. And for the first time in a very long time, the forward direction felt like something she had chosen rather than something she was surviving.